Okay, thank you. Okay. So is it okay if we just start off the way we normally would? And okay, great. Thank you. All right. Hi, welcome back to Therapy Chat. I'm your host, Laura Reagan, and today I'm here with Linda Thai, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with her, maybe for one of a few different conversations, I hope, if all goes according to plan, because you know that plans don't always go as expected. We know that. But if that works out, it will be so beautiful. So let's start off, Linda, please, by you just telling the audience a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Thank you, Laura, for the warm welcome. So I'm Linda Thai. I was born in Vietnam, raised in Australia, and these days I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, the unceded lands of the Tanana Athabascan peoples. And I'm a former child refugee. So my family sought refuge at the end of the Vietnam War, and we fled. One of the Vietnamese boat people lived in a refugee camp. And we're really fortunate to be sponsored into Australia under a pilot rural resettlement scheme. And yet, particularly in my 20s, I struggled with addiction and with mental illness. And I thought that there was something wrong with me. And I learned about trauma after I worked through my addiction recovery. And then in recent years, I've begun unpacking the impact of what happened to us as a family and as a peoples, and to recognize that there are so many areas in modern mental health that overlook the needs of refugees and immigrants, aspects of mental health that have come a long way in terms of trauma therapy. And yet what I've come to experience through my own experience of healing is that you can't do trauma without doing grief.
Mm.
And so it's actually a rather magical confluence to be with you today, given the circumstances of your life currently, Laura.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about how I'm going through personal grief right now, and I'll get tearful, but we lost a family member. And even in that, even in what you just said about your experience and how what happened affected your family, and how um what happened to you, what happened to your family, and what happened to your people is such a huge to understand that impact is such a huge part of the healing. And even within our family, which has been um, in the United States since the early 1900s, at least, depending on which part, it was really something I was even talking about and thinking about after, as we were sitting together after the funeral, about how destructive the immigration experience was to the fabric of this family before, long before we were born, and how their experiences caused them to detach from not only their home country, but the community that they came to, and the mistrust of different groups based on efforts to assimilate. And then but how it's really through the generations been deeply destructive, that trauma and the grief of what was lost, the culture that was lost. There's
Because
so
culture
much.
is because culture is identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Culture is identity. And we forge ahead by trying to find others who can inhabit a new identity with us. And yet, part of the survival imperative is to assimilate. And so some of us never got to cultivate an identity that we never got to have.
Right.
And so it's such an ambiguous, complex, and nuanced, weighty loss that goes unspoken.
Yeah, and it is unspoken. And so even when you sometimes I don't know about for you, but and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but sometimes when you try to even get other people who share that experience to relate to what was lost and how I didn't expect to cry through this whole thing, but maybe I'll get myself together. It doesn't matter. But you know, people who know me talk with me through me crying a lot because that's how I am. I'm very emotional. But anyway, when you try to talk about that with other people, even if it's their shared ancestral experience, they may not relate to those concepts. And then, that kind of can make you feel isolated.
Yes. The strategies that keep us alive keep us from living. And so the survival imperative for all refugees and immigrants is keep moving forward no matter what. And so there are so many aspects then of unresolved losses. And we typically frame loss in modern society as something that I have or had, and now it's no longer here. And yet, with ambiguous grief, there are many layers to it. And one of those layers is I didn't get something. And the not getting of that has left a pervasive emptiness, loneliness, unnameable missingness of something that I never got to experience. And so I'm missing something and I'm missing something. And it's such a conundrum to miss something that you can't name.
Mm-hmm. It brings to mind adoption too, like adoption at birth, where especially transracial international adoption, where it's the same process, I guess, of losing connection with a culture that they never knew in here, but they somehow do know, feel in here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's also losing someone to addiction or mental illness or dementia, and yet that person's still alive, but they're not the person that you expect or knew or anticipate or remember.
Yeah, I got some of that. I got some of that I'm working with too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I so appreciate just already
Mm.
what you're just putting into words so much.
Yeah, it's important to slow things down so that we can name things, because we can only grieve and mourn something that we can name. And going through the process of grief, as amorphous as what the loss may feel, can actually then allow us to name that which we couldn't name prior to going through the process of grief.
Yeah.
I often look at trauma as extreme loss, extreme loss. And it can be loss of a person or a place or a behavior that you're giving up. And yet any attachment loss is going to land for the nervous system as traumatic because it's a rupture in our fabric. And there's then a shift in our worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And all forms of trauma involve a loss because of that shift in a worldview. My sanity, my sanctity, my sense of wholeness, my sense of trust in the world, right? That's an extreme loss. And we need to mourn that.
You know, I just think right now, yes, as I said to you when we were talking earlier, I'm going through an acute loss right now because there was someone I loved who passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And in before that happened, I've been dealing with this ambiguous loss with two different parental figures in my life who have dementia, with combined with the challenge of other people in our lives not understanding that, which just is, you know, again, that like, this is happening, I see it's happening, you say it isn't happening, and that just makes it more confusing and adds a layer of challenge to it. And then, you know, and then there's like the um childhood loss of the attachment wounds that, you know, weren't things that happened or didn't happen that were needed, things that didn't happen that were needed, or things that did happen that weren't what was safe. And um, so then there's, I don't even know what I would say about the amount of community, the loss of community in our Western culture. And then there's the pandemic, and everyone who has these intangible losses that I think are just beginning to glimmer into many people's awareness of, wow, that really happened. And a lot of people are saying it didn't happen, which is, you know, isn't there an interesting parallel here? How I keep bringing up, you know, people saying something's not happening that
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying is happening. But just noticing myself following that track again and again.
And it's disorienting.
Yeah.
It's disorienting. I mean, it's important that we name that we live in a grief phobic and a loss phobic and a feelings phobic society. And for some of us, we live in a grief phobic, loss phobic, feeling phobic family system, community system, perhaps religious systems. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this adds even more disorientation when you're going through acute grief because it's an acute traumatic loss. And so your nervous system is going through all of the symptoms of acute loss, which are the same as the symptoms of acute trauma. Right? Your nervous system is all over the place, hypo and hyper. Your sleep patterns are all over the place. Your energy regulation systems are offline. You don't know what you need. You're not connected to your body, to thirst, to hunger, to appetite, to sleep, to your needs. There are elements of depersonalization as well as derealization. Yeah. As in, you're not connected to your body, but there's also a disorientation from the environment, where you are, who you're with, the time of day, the time of year, what year it even is. You might be flip-flopping back and forth between parts of self.
Mm.
You know, you might have child parts that are coming forward, flooding the system. And then the managers, the protectors, the firefighters might then be working overtime, depending on the systems that are around you, to support you through what you're going through, because you might be the person that's helping everyone else in the family to move through all of this. And then in amongst all of that, there's what I'm hearing in you, Laura, is a deep call from the soul.
Yeah.
To I'm sorry, I'm struggling to find the words. Francis Weller's words come to mind. He wrote The Wild Edge of Sorrow. Yeah, it's a call to apprentice oneself with sorrow. Yeah, to become an apprentice to sorrow. There's Kairos and there's Chronos. Kairos is soul time. Chronos is clock time. And grief operates on soul time. And so for many of us, we may have experienced losses throughout our lives, but it wasn't Kairos. Yeah. And you're experiencing the soul time for grief.
That feels true.
Yeah. And so Francis Weller talks about this as a walk through the underground of oneself and one's psyche and the collective experience of what it means to be human, which is to mourn and to celebrate the melancholy thread that weaves its way through all things. It's to deeply dance with impermanence as that which provides the magic.
That. I've never thought about impermanence as something that provides the magic. I just thought about it as like an inconvenient fact. Something to accept, but not like.
Yeah. But no, it's you're part of the practice is radical acceptance. In some of the little moments when you were sharing about your current situation, what I was hearing was denial and avoidance. And as therapists, we know that working with denial and avoidance is 85% of therapy, right? And yet we need to also acknowledge that they were survival strategies.
Yeah. There's a
In
very good
acute,
reason for those strategies to be there. Yeah.
yes. And states become traits, becomes identity, becomes culture. And so every culture has words for suck it up, stuff it down, keep moving forward. And to recognize that what we consider to be criteria for dysfunctional families, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, are actually survival strategies under fascism, under communism, under any sort of oppression that says deny who you are and where you've come from. And your family needed to do that.
Yeah.
It just becomes decontextualized over time.
Yeah. But then when you are mourning or you want to be mourning together, so maybe this is a child part, you want to be mourning, connecting, and um comforting one another and really trying to support one another through the loss. Um, I'll say this: when my grandmother, who was a very, very important attachment figure to me and all of my siblings, when she passed away, and this was 18 years ago, actually 19 years this month, um, she, her loss, we all kind of retreated from one another. We came together, but we didn't connect. It was like we were each in these little, and my mom. So there were the four siblings and one, my mom, all just in our individual little silos of grief. And um, I I turned toward what I considered to be my support system at the time and the therapy that I was already in at the time. And I mean, I happened to have already been in therapy when the loss happened. So it was fortunate that I was able to just incorporate that into therapy. But it was, it kind of felt different. Maybe there's some other dynamics that relate to that. But, you know, here it feels like we could support one another. Maybe it's just me wanting everyone to support one another, but each person's own way of coping is kind of prevents them from connecting. So it's really the same. It's just a different, um, we withdrew and just sort of left each other alone. And in this situation, it's a little more of a kind of chaotic and high conflict group.
Grief is grief is painful,
Yes.
right? So when there's been a trauma history, we then go to our trauma survival strategies,
Yeah.
which is to isolate, withdraw, retreat, or lash out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we mask up.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you're not just experiencing collective grief, you're experiencing collected grief,
Mm-hmm.
grief that has bioaccumulated over time
Mm.
that you don't have a container for in terms of ritual, in terms of relationality, in terms of other protective factors. And it's now expressing itself as lateral violence.
You are picking up what I'm putting down. You're getting it. Exactly. Exactly.
Would it be okay if in this moment you could take in just a little bit of that I'm getting it?
Yeah, I do. I do feel grateful when you are naming what you're naming. It's like my system is going, yeah, that's it. That's it. But it's not just it just feels like the lateral violence. I mean, that.
And this is so common in under-resourced families
Mm-hmm.
when there's an acute loss of someone who held the family together, whether it was in functionality or in dysfunctionality or a combination of both. Because we know that in dysfunctional families, that homeostasis collusion is a survival strategy. It's not a pathology, it's a survival strategy. And so is impaired mourning, because the family system doesn't have the individual or communal bandwidth to be able to hold spaciousness for the individual needs of the members of the system in such a way that enhances the elasticity of the system and the responsivity of the system.
Mm.
And then we develop roles within that family. And yet each individual somehow experiences the sense of there's something wrong with me. Or there's something wrong with you.
Yes, it's like, and I think being a therapist
Mm.
is helpful in some ways because I mean, a lot of therapists I know are like, "Oh, I'm the one who takes care of my whole family." And I'm like, I'm not. Why don't they like me enough for that?" But and I'm also saying, thank goodness I don't have to grapple with that, you know, urge. But it feels like you can see the dynamics and you can see the reactions and have compassion for each person's pain interfering with their ability to fully grieve. Although, as I think about it, it's like in that moment, just because they're not there in that moment when I want them to be, doesn't mean that they're not where they should be, you know?
Yeah. It's not their Kairos time yet.
Mm.
But this is the drama triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And for some of us, fight, flight, fix is how we survived. We learned to fix. Yeah. And yet for some of us, like in your situation, Laura, you managed to step outside of that. And yet we can then experience the guilt, the shame, the blame of being the bystander who does nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whether that's projected onto us or whether that's something we've already internalized. And yet to move through that so that we can be healthier can be such a challenge when or if fixing has been how we have survived or the role that we took on in order to help the family to survive.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. I'm beginning to wonder about some of my own patterns as we're talking, which is good to wonder about.
Yes. On a more deeply humanistic perspective, when I'm with my clients and I've one of the phrases that I use from time to time is that life is a vehicle through which we get to know ourselves. And it sounds like you're having the experience of getting to know yourself in ways that you would not otherwise be getting to know if it weren't for these current circumstances.
Mm.
And it feels like such an honor for me to be accompanying you and witnessing you as you're getting to know yourself in these
Mm.
new ways.
Thank you. Thank you for witnessing and holding space and sort of narrating what's happening too. That's a very valuable experience for me to have to be witnessed this way. Definitely unique as well in the way that you're doing it. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you for your willingness to share this with your listeners. It's a catch-22 for complex trauma survivors because trauma says exposure equals death,
Yes.
and grief says all I need is witnessing. And so complex developmental trauma survivors, out of necessity, we become phobic of our inner landscape.
Mhm.
And we weren't taught how to grieve. Our developmentally appropriate upsets were not responded to in adequate or appropriate ways. And so we don't know how to respond to ourselves when life happens.
Mm.
And we can barely tolerate witnessing ourselves and our own pain. And so your capacity to be public with your grief, your capacity to cry and smile, and to cry and talk, and to cry and be seen, as well as to cry and receive. Says so much about how far you have already come. And I hope I don't come across as minimizing what you're currently experiencing. However, it's important to name this.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like minimizing. It feels like I feel like I needed that, what you just said, because it was like the thought process I had was, oh, I'm always crying. Maybe I'm just so uncontained. And then I was like, wait, you used to not cry at all, ever. And before that, you used to cry all the time. So you used to cry all the time. Then you didn't cry at all for like long times, like years at a time. And now you're feeling what you feel. So it is a healthy expression to be that this is the way you're supposed to feel when someone you love dies and when there's, you know, friction and strain with people you love and that you don't, you want to feel connected with. And it's just another loss on top of it when each interaction where you try to connect and it isn't met is another loss in that moment. It's not a permanent loss, but it lands that way.
Would it be okay if in our wrapping up, I point out something that your body is asking for?
Sure, please.
So your hand is doing this. It's doing the reach.
Ah,
Reach. Would it be okay if you slow that down and reach out towards me?
okay. I don't know what I was exactly doing, but I'll just,
Something, yeah.
even as I begin to extend my hand, I feel something in my belly.
Yeah. And I'm gonna reach, just
Mm.
notice what happens in your body as my hand reaches out and wraps around your hand.
Mm.
And I'm squeezing, and you can squeeze back.
Where's my hand? There it is for the
Yeah.
for the camera.
The camera, yeah. And just notice what it's like, yeah, to squeeze and to see me squeezing back.
Mm. So nice. It feels so nice.
Mhm.
I can feel like a expansiveness inside that's like my abdomen like just filling more with air and like movement and a release of constriction or contraction.
Yeah, so just notice that and stay with that. And then right before you did the reach, your hand did this,
Mm.
right? And you tucked your hair behind, yeah. But I'm wondering if it's okay for you to slow down that movement and let it become something. Let it become, I don't know if that hand actually would prefer to sweep the face or to hold the back of the head. But as you begin to track that little sweep, just allow your body to speak the action of attachment. And it could simply be the stroking of the forehead.
That's what feels really nice. Nice. And
Yeah.
I feel like also this.
Mm-hmm. And so notice what happens inside.
A harder sensation to name, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like a settling of some kind in my same kind of area from my diaphragm down to my like bottom of
Mhm,
my abdomen.
mhm,
Mm.
mhm. And so, something I do with my clients on Zoom is I mirror this for you, and then I offer it to you if you would like to experience me offering. Right? My hand reaching towards. Mhm.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then,
Mhm.
yeah, sweeping your
Mm.
forehead.
I'm gonna touch. Okay.
Yeah, sweeping your forehead. And then sweeping the side of your face.
Mm. That's really nice to imagine you touching.
Yeah. And so, my invitation for you is to see if there's someone in your life, yeah, who can perhaps do this for you.
Mm. Thank you. You are a very special person.
Mm.
I said magic before. I don't want to overdo it, but
Thank you. I can hear my next clients at the door.
okay.
Yeah.
So we will stop for now, and if
Mhm,
it comes together as we intend, we may continue this conversation in
mhm.
another week soon. I'll just follow up with you.
Yeah. That's my cell phone number.
Okay.
Please text me.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will also include your contact information and website in this episode when it goes out, that I'll just share all that and you can go be with your client. So, Linda, thank you so much from my soul for spending this time with me now and for sharing
Mhm.
this together for the benefit of our communities.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being curious about me and yes. Okay, take care
I'm
of
even more
yourself.
curious now. I want more. So, yes. Thank you. You take care too. And
Okay,
I'll
bye
hope
for
to be
now.
with you soon. Thank you.